What you can do with your quotes though, is you can break them up and use them at different sections of the sentence. That's a more sophisticated way of doing it. That's called embedding your quotes into the sentence naturally so that you don't have this one distinct long quote. Instead, you've chopped it up and worked it into your sentence. So it all flows, but on multiple occasions, you're referring to a quotation. Maybe you're referring to two different quotations that kind of fit together nicely into the sentence. That's the most advanced level of using quotes. Okay, so does everyone see on the slide here, this example? So we had the original one where it's a little bit clunky, right? We had the comma. Now look at how we've reworked it. Tony's use of a metaphor when describing Brett as a shell of himself reveals the extent to which Brett's morale had depleted after returning from war. What have we done to the quote to make this flow? So instead of saying he was, notice how he was, is that really an important part of the quote, he was? No. The important part is that he's a shell of himself. So cut it down to its bare minimum, right? And then it's more adaptable, because then it was easy to say, oh, Tony's use of a metaphor when describing Brett as. The word as before the quote was really important. So make sure you are looking at what word have you used right before the quote. That's just as important for ensuring the flow. It's not just going to automatically happen if you shorten the quote. You've got to shorten the quote plus set up the sentence in the right way so that it flows in directly before and then it then continues on after. But now if I read this sentence out, Tony's use of a metaphor when describing Brett as a shell of himself, see how I didn't have to stop to say the quote? I didn't have to pause with a comma. That's a nice flow. So that's what you want to achieve with all of your quotes as best as possible. Sometimes it might be tricky to do it. I'm not saying you have to do it 100% of the time to get a band 6. I'm just saying this is something you can try and improve throughout wherever possible. Here is another way of removing the returning from war aspect. We can change that to the end. So Tony's use of a metaphor when observing that Brett was a shell of himself. Notice how we've substituted he for Brett, but I put it in square brackets. Why have I put it in square brackets? Did we need to even keep it in this quote? Not really. We could actually take it out and say, when observing that Brett, quote, was a shell of himself. Do you see how you can manipulate, you can cut bits out from the quote, add some extra words before, but if you change the original quote to something else and it's in the quotation marks, you need to represent that new word with a square bracket on either side. So that tells the marker that wasn't originally in the quote. That's when you use square brackets. Okay, and then it says, reveals the extent to which Brett's morale had depleted after returning from war. See the little bit of extra context that we just added? Like 4 words after returning from war. 4 words, but now I know what you're referring to in the text. So that's what we mean by contextualizing the quote as well.